After the success of Sonic Mania, it's no surprise I'm thinking, what would Sega do next? What series would I like to see get the Mania treatment? Of course, it didn't take long to think of Streets of Rage. Now, I mentioned this right at the start, I already know about Streets of Rage Remake, which pretty much is exactly what I want. But since that fan game is no longer officially available, I'd love to see them do the same thing with Streets of Rage as they did with Sonic. Though I don't actually see that happening anytime soon, it does give me a good excuse to go back and play the originals. Of course, we have to start where it all started, Streets of Rage 1, that was released in August 1991. This once peaceful city was suddenly attacked by gangs from a secret criminal organization, and so a small group of determined police officers in the form of Adam, Axel, and Blaze decide to head to the streets to clean up this town. A very simple plot, but honestly I don't need much more excuse to just go out there and take down some hooligans. Of the three choices, Axel was always the person I picked because he was the middle ground, and I always liked the average character over the more powerful Adam or the more nimble Blaze. For those with less experience on the genre, this is pretty much what it consists of, moving from left to right, beating up anything that comes in your path. Of course, it does change location with each stage, as well as give new enemies to fight and bosses as well. Now, growing up, I only ever played 1 and 2, and in terms of gameplay, replaying them again has made me realize something that I feel like I knew all along. Streets of Rage 1 is very restrictive, a bit awkward to control. I almost want to say, like, jagged? Does that even make sense? I feel like it suffers from something I've complained about before in a different series. The reports are in, and I have some bad news. I'm afraid you have first game syndrome. I mentioned this in my Sonic the Hedgehog video as well. The first game feels more like a proof of concept, a trial of concepts and mechanics. It's still enjoyable, but doesn't have those refined elements. With its somewhat simplistic moveset, dealing with certain enemies and bosses especially can be quite tricky. For example, I don't even know the strategy to get close to the boss of stage 2. Anytime I get close, he introduces knives to my face, and jumping at him, he's just teleports behind you. I just wind up using the special attack at the end to just deal as much damage as possible and hope to God I hit him afterwards. But the boss I really struggled with was these two. Now, this was before the game had names for the enemies, so I'll refer to them as the twins. Not only do they just jump around dodging any attack you do, the fact that there's two of them means as you're dealing with one of them, the other one comes and roughs you up. And when you have very limited abilities to deal with that, it can become frustrating. It isn't just bosses though, sometimes you can be caught in very one-sided fights. Thankfully, that doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, it can really take away your health. Of course, my goal isn't to just come here and be overly negative about the first game. I actually really enjoy it. But having played the second game a lot more, where a lot of these issues are resolved, it's easy to see where the limitations are. But honestly, apart from the stiff fighting, the game has a lot going for it. Graphically, the game is very interesting to look at, with lovely landscapes or areas that have a ton of color. They did surprisingly well with the visuals given the limited viewpoint. As for characters, everything's great, except for one little thing I noticed. Limited space was used in the facial region, which kinda makes me think Axel has a giant eyebrow. But enough detail was put into the enemies to be able to instantly identify who's who. Ah, it's those guys who always like to try and throw me, or it's these guys who always use basic attacks. Easily the best thing of the game though is this rockin' soundtrack. Yuzo Koshiro, oh my god, can you just make music for everything. As soon as the boss track starts, you know you're in for a fight, and it just nails that intense feeling. The last thing I want to mention is the difficulty spike of the last stage. You best hope you've learned everything about the game and its bosses because you're fighting them all again, one after another, which also includes the twins, and this has always been my stopping point. And in between each fight, you're dealing with a small handful of enemies just chipping away at your health. When I did this recording, this level alone ate 6 of my lives. If you somehow manage to beat it and get to the final boss, you're given a choice to become the right-hand man of the organization leader. If you say yes, he opens up a trapdoor and sends you back to stage 6. What a dick! He's even more of a dick if you fight him. This guy moves faster than Sonic and has a machine gun. How is that fair? I don't know. But we beat him and saved the city. For now. Man, the first game is harder than I thought. That final stage just wants you dead. But I do think it's the fun kind of challenge. Not great, but good overall. Oh, but what comes next is possibly my favorite beat 'em up on the Megadrive. Streets of Rage 2 was actually the first game of the series I played, with one a bit after. It first hit store shelves December 1992. Though I could say I grew up with the first one, I never actually owned it myself. It actually belonged to a friend of mine, and I used to go over there and play it a bunch. The only one I've ever owned myself was the second one, before various compilations came out. That is probably why I have more fond memories of this one. The game opens up with... it's the photo from the end of the first game. That's a nice touch. Mr. X, the name of the leader of the criminal organization, has been brought back to life? I don't exactly remember the part where I killed the man. Well, either way, he's kidnapped Adam, so Axel and Blaze have decided to hunt down Mr. X. Along with them are Skate, Adam's younger brother, and Axel's friend Max, or as I like to call him, the goddamn Hulk! I mean, Jesus, just look at this guy! Alright, stage 1, and I'm already full of nostalgia. Right out the gate, the fighting already feels 10 times better. And you're given a few extra moves to use that you didn't have in the first. Pressing down an attack while jumping will do a different type of kick, not sending the enemy flying. Double tapping forward an attack will do the character's signature move. And hitting A instead of calling the police now does a special move. Pressing forward an A does a different variation. All these new moves basically make you completely prepared to take on anything the game throws at you. But it's all about learning when to make those moves count. Now, I'd understand if there was an argument there that it makes the game easier. Certain moves are very spammable, and it definitely feels like the game wasn't designed to prevent that. But I'd say the game isn't much easier, especially if you play on normal. There are 2 more difficulties harder. 3 if you count the unlockable mania mode. That's actually quite funny when you think about it. I think my favorite change is the A button not calling the police but using a special move. You can use said move whenever you want at the cost of health. The standard A move only costs health if you hit with it, though the forward A move costs health no matter what happens. In situations like this, that move would have been crucial. Now you can choose to get away with what would be a health draining encounter to just using a little bit of health to get out of that situation. In terms of enemies that you'll be fighting, it's actually pretty similar to the first, as in it's exactly like the first except with updated sprites. Seriously, that guy is that guy and that guy is that guy. The game even reuses some bosses as normal enemies and just reuses some bosses altogether. Of course with new moves and adjusted AI. But even with the new fighting style, there are still some bosses that will kick your ass if you let them. You gotta be extra aggressive to make sure these guys don't get the upper hand. Look, I know it might sound like I'm fanboying, and yeah. Hey, wait a minute. There's an inconsistency here. In the first game, I couldn't suplex one of the large dudes, so how come I suddenly can? I guess the argument that they got stronger could apply, but there is a reason I'm bringing it up, so keep it in mind for later. I'll briefly go over the final stage and final boss because I did for the first game. It's essentially the same deal though. You go through a gauntlet of enemies and bosses that you fought before, you lose a ton of lives, and the final boss has a machine gun. The big difference is before the final boss, you fight a very unique boss called Shiva, and I've always just said that he's the legs version of Axel. Tough fight, but not the hardest thing in the world. Same with the final boss too. He's alright actually. So with the main bulk of the gameplay talk out of the way, let's talk about the other aspects. And firstly, I gotta comment on how gorgeous this game looks. The first game looked lovely as well, but this one just blows it out of the water in terms of making the areas visually interesting and to separate their themes out really well. You start in a street, going to a back alley, you're suddenly fighting in a bar, and that's just level 1. There's bridge works, arcades, which leads into the alien set, you know, because we needed that. a ballpark which has a secret elevator that leads to an underground wrestling ring, a lovely beach to a robot factory. I mean, yeah, I guess the first one does beat this out in terms of realistic locations, but I don't care, I'm having a great time. I just blasted you with a handful of visual themes, and that's not even all the levels. And in terms of characters, the enemies are even more distinctly unique, with nice color palettes. Axel no longer looks like he has a giant eyebrow. Okay, a little bit. But in general, the set pieces just look way nicer. So much detail was put into what is essentially a corridor. And last, but definitely not least, let's talk about that soundtrack, because oh my god, there we go. There's my boy. Ooh, and someone else helped as well. 2's soundtrack is my favorite of the 3 games. It is probably up there as one of my favorite OSTs on the Megadrive in general. It takes a lot more of a bubbly approach in comparison to 1, which complements the action and the fighting quite well, but it isn't afraid to get action-packed when a boss appears, or eerie when something doesn't feel quite right. But there is always one track I go back to. Listening to it just motivates me. It's the kind of track that you listen to and you feel like you can get anything done. If you just want a good feel-good song, listen to the credits music. God, it's just a perfect way to wrap up the adventure. We've saved Adam, everyone's happy, the bad guy has been defeated, everyone gets to go home. With these ending pictures and this beautiful music playing, I remember the first time I beat this. Oh my god, it was so satisfying. And in a funny way, I have to credit the first game for that satisfaction, because had I not played that game before I beat the second, I wouldn't have even known who Adam was. So, playing that before beating this just made it feel so much better. Now, before we move on, there is someone I need to see. I'm just gonna be a moment, so...
Hey there, good friend. I just wanted to let you know I miss you. You were taken from us way too early. I still often find myself thinking, what could have been?
Yeah, the third game sucks. Let me try to explain why. Streets of Rage 3 was the last of the series. This one released March 1994. Gameplay-wise, it's much the same with a few tweaks to... Movement and combat have been refined, it's ever so slightly faster and tighter to control. You even have a few new moves to your arsenal to be able to take down the hordes of... God damn it! Shit, fuck. God damn it! Really? What in the world is going on here? Either I've suddenly become really bad at Streets of Rage, or this is tough. Like, way too difficult. Okay, let's start from the top, because there are things I really like about this game. First of all, the pacing. The pacing is so much better just because it's a little bit faster. It feels satisfying to have quick reaction times and the game respond accordingly. Double tapping a direction allows you to now roll and run, which adds a lot to the speed of the game, as well as just your attacks feeling like they connect quicker and combo into each other better. Though this is nice, it does have a bad side effect. It can make the enemies feel like they're way too fast as well, but we'll get to that in a bit. Something else that's improved is weapons occasionally have special moves, either assigned to the double forward attack button or the forward A button. I kinda learned that after the fact and don't have any footage, so Distraction Bomb! Something else you might notice is the meter in the middle building up over time. This is one of the more interesting additions. This is essentially a special meter that allows you to use your special moves without the cost of health, which honestly feels like it becomes a crucial part of playing the game effectively, cause man, you're gonna be wanting to spam those special moves to get as many invincibility frames as possible. And one last small thing is eventually you may see a star by your health bar. What this actually means is your signature move has been enhanced. So now your grand upper, your bare knuckle, goes just a bit further and a bit faster. And I actually really dislike that, as it throws a lot of my combos off, but I could see it being useful in certain situations. Now I have been told that it can display display 3 stars, meaning that your move evolves over time, but I myself never got it past the first star. So let's take a break from talking about the things I like to mentioning the problems I have. I've barely played this game, maybe 2 or 3 times before, but given my experience with the second game, I thought I'd be able to go in and play competently. And to a point, I can. I can take out waves of enemies, not too bad. The boss of stage 1 is Shiva, and he's actually pretty tough for a stage 1 boss. Then stage 2's boss comes along and absolutely rips me apart. It's like the twins from the first game decided to take 10 5-hour energy shots, crank up the dial to 11 out of 5. With the amount they dodge and attack, I can barely get a move in edgeways. I could just feel like the game was taking that kind of direction as soon as I started fighting Bruce and Rue. But believe me, after Mona and Lisa, it is just downhill all the way from there. Far too many times can I count moments where I feel like, okay, can I move on now? Can there stop being enemies? Comparing it to the second game, it's like a completely different experience. The pacing of the combat might feel improved, but the pacing of the levels themselves is way off. What probably doesn't help is the fact the enemy's health gets scaled by so much as you progress through the game. Not every single enemy, but it wouldn't be surprising if you often ran into some people with health bars as long as you, and then maybe 2 more health bars after that. I may have a reason to why. The game is a bit shorter than the others, meaning they may have increased the difficulty to try and keep playability up. Slightly higher health bars and a lot more enemies to make it feel like you're getting the same length out of the experience. But because of that, I feel like the sense of progression feels off. In 2, it felt like I was always fighting and advancing, but in 3, it just felt like I was going from gauntlet to gauntlet. But hey, to the game's credit, people may like that. I have met some people that really enjoy this game. I could easily see this as the Streets of Rage for people who just thought the second one was a little too easy. But what really bugs me about this game is I feel like it's a step back. There are so many inconsistencies. I could do this in the second, why am I back to not being able to? And it's things like that that frustrate me. I see so much potential here, but it feels like a huge step in the wrong direction. It's had the first 2 games to set up certain rules, and the third game is just like, oh hey, you see that health item? Yeah, enemies can pick that up now. It's just gone. Get over it.
Yum yum.
The game really takes the cake when you get to this boss in particular. Yamato is a boss that's just very quick. He does a lot of moves to counter your moves. He dances all over the place and can attack you from afar, chipping your health away. But the reason why this boss takes the cake is because you have to fight him 3 times in a row. This whole fight is basically the reasons why I dislike this game, all wrapped into one. He's so tedious to fight. He has 3 health bars per form. That's 9 health bars altogether. The same moves over and over and over again, chipping away at your health, and you only get 1 healing item for the whole fight. And combos don't really work either because they did this thing where bosses reflect back when you hit them. No, wait, he does get some new moves. Each form has different... Now, before we sign off, I want to go over the last 2 things I want to mention about the game, and that is the graphics, first of all, is very hit and miss in this one. The levels look alright, but I really feel like they lack the visual pop of the second. But that's nothing compared to whatever they did to the character sprites, because they just don't look good. I don't know, something really puts me off about them. Maybe I just got used to the cleaner look of 2. But lastly, the music. I'm not as fond of it. There are definitely some good tracks in there, but a lot of the other music seems kind of all over the place. Not really a bad point, just a bit of a letdown, really. And honestly, that's probably the best way to describe my feelings of the third. Hate is probably too strong a word. I was just completely let down. The first game was fun, even though challenging, and the second game, not perfect, was one of my favorite games of the genre on the system. It had so much potential in its fighting system. It's just the rest of it dragged it down. If you want the true Streets of Rage 3 experience, play the Japanese version. For some reason, the difficulty of the English version got raised a lot, which honestly might have a lot to do with why I dislike it as much as I do. But really, if you enjoy the side-scrolling beat-em-up genre, I highly recommend you play all 3. 3. I admit my dislike for 3 might have a lot to do with my nostalgia for 2, because when I was playing that a lot, I never knew about the existence of a third game until years later, so I fantasized about what it might be. Of course, the reality to that is none of those thoughts were met, so I probably disliked it more than I should have. So you might find it more enjoyable going in with a fresh take on the series. That being said, if you have played the Streets of Rage series, I'd love to know what you thought. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you disagree with me. I'd love to hear what you think. Either way, guys, those were my memories of Streets of Rage. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Pixelated Memories. My desk went through a bit of a reorganization, so the camera's a little bit off. I apologize for that. I'd also like to take this time to thank every single one of my Patreon supporters, and if you'd like to support the show, link in the description. Even $1 helps. If you did enjoy this episode, a like would be appreciated, and if you want to see more, then press that lovely subscribe button. For a more recent thing, check out Sonic Mania, or for a really old thing, check out 3D Movie Maker, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Take care, and goodbye.